All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're gonna be looking at something that feels pretty fundamental to being human,
Right.
right? That spark of curiosity and that pull of interest, that feeling when you see something new, it just catches your eye. Or there's a topic that you hear about and you're just like, I want to know everything about that.
Right, right.
I think we all kind of have these urges, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's that everyday kind of understanding of curiosity and interest
Yeah.
that makes the source material that we're looking at today so compelling.
Right.
We're diving into a paper called Process Account of Curiosity and Interest, a reward learning perspective.
Hmm.
And one of the things that this research points out right away is that while we all kind of have this intuitive grasp of what curiosity and interest are,
Hmm.
scientists have really struggled to define them precisely.
Right. It seems like such a basic thing, this drive to learn and to explore. So why is there this difficulty in pinning it down with like a solid definition?
Well, the authors propose a really insightful idea. They suggest that curiosity and interest are what they term um, naive concepts or folk concepts.
Okay.
And the idea here is that, we as humans, we feel these things, we feel curiosity, we feel interest, and so we create these labels in our daily lives to try to describe them. But our personal interpretations, our naive or our folk interpretation, might not perfectly align with the way that scientists would try to carve up the world into these distinct scientific categories.
Gotcha, gotcha. So what you're saying is like it's like defining beauty. We can all look at something and say that's a beautiful sunset.
Right.
But like scientifically defining what makes something beautiful is much harder.
Right, exactly. It's very subjective.
Mm.
And so, one of the kind of key insights I think from this paper is that maybe, just maybe, when we try to define curiosity and interest, we're trying to define something that's more about a feeling than a fixed entity.
Okay. So let's unpack this a little bit. So if chasing these definitions is proving to be a difficult thing to do, what's the alternative? What is the path that this paper is suggesting?
So that's where the process account comes into play.
Yeah.
So they introduced this framework of reward learning. And the kind of key shift here is instead of trying to like really define curiosity and interest, we should focus more on understanding the fundamental processes, psychological processes that motivate us to seek knowledge in the first place.
Mhm.
So less about defining and more about what are the building blocks of this phenomenon.
Okay.
And so at the heart of this framework is the concept of reward.
Right.
So it's that satisfying feeling that we get when we grasp something new.
Right.
And so the paper really centers on this rewarding experience of acquiring knowledge.
Okay.
And what they're proposing is that the very act of learning something new actually reinforces our desire for even more information.
Hmm.
It's as if our brains are saying, hey, that felt good, let's do that again.
That's so interesting. So I think that's a good overview of kind of what we're going to be looking at today. So the mission of this deep dive is not to give you, listener, a textbook definition of curiosity and interest, but
Yeah.
to really explore this reward learning framework and to see how it illuminates these drives, these very familiar drives, without getting caught up in, is it this, is it that, is it different, are they the same?
Right, exactly. Yeah, by concentrating on the mechanisms, the underlying mechanisms, I think we can come to a more fundamental understanding of why we're driven to learn and explore new things.
Absolutely. So let's delve into this problem of definition a bit deeper. So the paper mentions that there's this long-standing debate among researchers about these terms. So what exactly has been the sticking point?
Yeah, so for decades now, researchers have been trying to tease apart curiosity and interest, trying to find what's unique about each of them. How much do they overlap? How much are they different?
Mm.
And, they've tried different ways to kind of categorize curiosity and interest.
Mm.
But as the paper highlights, there's really no universally accepted definitions that have emerged.
And it sounds like that has created maybe some awkward situations where academics are kind of being pushed by, editors and things like that to make these clear distinctions when maybe even they themselves aren't totally confident.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so the paper points out that oftentimes researchers find themselves kind of using the terms interchangeably, or maybe focusing on one, like curiosity. But then they get put in this position where, an editor or reviewer is like, well, hold on a second. You're saying curiosity, you need to define this very precisely, and you need to tell me how it's different than interest.
Right.
And so, puts the researcher in this tough spot because scientific rigor typically demands that we have these clear boundaries and definitions.
So,
But if these concepts of curiosity and interest are fundamentally rooted in our subjective experiences,
right.
then, maybe finding that universally satisfying definition is just an impossible task.
It's like trying to catch a shadow, right? You can see it.
Yeah.
You can, in a way, interact with it.
Yeah.
But pinning down the exact form is the challenge.
Right.
And the paper touches on this idea from Nisbet and Wilson, their research, which was that sometimes we don't have like conscious access to the reasons why we think and feel certain things.
Yeah.
So you feel the sensation of curiosity, you feel the sensation of interest, but you're not necessarily aware of all of the behavioral, psychological, neural processes that give rise to that feeling.
Right.
So like your understanding as, a regular person
Yeah.
is based on these feelings.
Right.
And so expecting these, what they called them folk concepts, to have these inherent objective definitions that perfectly mirror these underlying processes might just be a little unrealistic.
Yeah. And as Kidd and Hayden also suggest, it's very possible that the feeling that we label as curiosity is really just kind of the tip of a much larger unseen iceberg of cognitive processes that are happening under the hood.
Right, right. So the paper is essentially suggesting that, this quest for the one correct definition might be a little bit of a fruitless endeavor. But they also emphasize that, studying the processes involved is still really valuable, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we can't perfectly nail down, that perfect definition,
Sure.
understanding the behavioral patterns, the psychological mechanisms, the brain activity that are linked to what we call curiosity and interest can still provide these really profound insights into how we learn, what motivates us. And, to their credit, previous research, even though there has been this debate about definitions, that research has already yielded these really important discoveries. But I think the point here is that while understanding these processes might not automatically give us these neat and tidy definitions,
Right.
it's really where the scientific progress lies.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears here to this alternative, this reward learning framework. So what's the core idea here, like in a nutshell?
So the central tenet is that acquiring knowledge itself acts as a reward.
Okay.
And the anticipation of this reward is what fuels our drive to seek out information in the first place. So it's really a fundamental kind of change in perspective where the outcome of learning, so gaining that knowledge,
Right.
is what is the primary motivator. So think of it as your brain saying, I want to know that, and if I find out, it's going to feel good.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. And this isn't just like a one-time event.
Right.
This is a continuous cycle. So the paper outlines this feedback loop. So can you walk us through how that works?
Sure, yeah. So it begins with us noticing that there's a gap in our understanding. So maybe you realize that you don't know how a particular historical event unfolded.
Right.
And according to Lowenstein's knowledge gap theory, this awareness of a gap in our knowledge creates this feeling of discomfort, kind of like an intellectual itch, if you will.
Gotcha.
And so this discomfort motivates us to try to seek out information,
Right.
driven by this expectation that it's going to feel good to know the answer.
Right.
So then we engage in information-seeking behavior, whether that's, actively researching, asking questions, just kind of like thinking things through.
Yeah, right.
And that leads to the acquisition of new knowledge.
Yeah.
So now you've learned something new. And this is the crucial part. That acquisition of new knowledge generates a rewarding experience. And so there's actually brain imaging studies that have shown that when we close these knowledge gaps, it activates reward networks in our brain. So think of it like, your brain's kind of happy circuits are lighting up when you figure something out.
Oh, that totally makes sense. Like the aha moment, right? There's good feeling associated with that. Yeah.
Exactly. And that feeling, that positive feeling, that is the reward that we're talking about. And so that rewarding feeling then strengthens the anticipated reward of future new information. So it makes us more inclined to seek out knowledge.
Gotcha.
Down the line.
Yeah.
And, even more than that, as our understanding grows, we often become aware of even more things that we don't know.
Right. Like it's the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Right.
Or I guess more accurately, the more you know, the more you realize there is to know.
Exactly. And so the paper uses an example of, maybe you're learning about quadratic equations, and then that leads you to kind of wonder about, are the cubic equations, and what are those? And so this creates this positive feedback loop where, learning sparks more learning.
Right.
And this is, it's interesting to note that this is a really critical difference between this kind of reinforcement learning framework and things like food or other kinds of rewards. Because with something like food, once you're full, the reward is satisfied and you're no longer motivated to eat.
Right. Right. Yeah, you get that feeling of satiation.
Right. But with knowledge, it's kind of the opposite. Acquiring some knowledge often
Yeah.
just fuels the fire. It makes you want to seek out more. And this is interesting because the paper actually connects this to research showing that there's this positive relationship between domain knowledge, so how much you know about a particular area, and domain-specific interest. So the more you know about something, the more interested you tend to be in it.
It makes perfect sense. So this feedback loop, it seems pretty central to this whole thing. So what are some of the key mechanisms that make it tick?
Yeah.
So the paper mentions reward prediction errors or information prediction errors.
Right.
Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So this is where the element of surprise comes in.
Okay.
So, consider this. If you learn something new, that's exactly what you already thought. It's mildly satisfying.
Right.
But if you learn something that completely surprises you, something that's unexpectedly valuable or different than your expectations, that feeling of reward is amplified. So that element of surprise is really a powerful amplifier of our desire to learn more. It's those unexpected discoveries that really kind of stick in our minds and really fuel that future curiosity.
It's almost like when you watch a movie, right?
Yeah.
And there's a plot twist. And it's just like, whoa,
It's
now everything that I've just seen for the last 2 hours means something totally different.
Exactly.
Like, oh man, I need to know more about this now.
Right.
Like you recontextualize your entire understanding of the thing that you're engaging with.
Exactly. And Marvin and Shoami refer to this as information prediction error. So basically, it's the difference between the reward value of the information that you anticipate getting versus the actual reward value that you experience. So if the information is more valuable or more surprising than you expected, it creates what's called a positive prediction error. And those positive prediction errors, they increase the anticipated reward value of future new information. So as Vogel and colleagues have found, learning something that challenges your assumptions can be a huge boost to your drive to seek out more information.
Right, right.
And conversely, if the information is, underwhelming, or exactly as you predicted, it can actually kind of like lessen the perceived value of seeking out further information.
That makes perfect sense. Like if you kind of already know where something's going or you kind of know what the answer is, you're less likely to, keep searching for more about it.
Right.
And then the other key mechanism you mentioned was the expansion of our knowledge base.
Right, yeah. So as we learn more, we don't just kind of like fill in the blanks that are already there. We also become aware of new related questions and gaps that we weren't even aware of before.
Right.
So, Renninger highlighted this, and Lowenstein really kind of beautifully described it. He said, new information is constantly providing this ever-changing idea of what there is to be known.
Right.
And so, your initial understanding of, say, the Roman Empire might then lead you to kind of wonder about, well, how did that impact modern law?
Right.
Or how did the Roman Empire interact with other ancient civilizations? And this is kind of, again, another critical difference between this reinforcement learning framework and things like food or other kinds of primary rewards. Because, once you're full, the reward is satisfied.
Yeah.
But with knowledge, acquiring some often makes us want more.
Right, right. Yeah, there's no upper limit, there's no ceiling. It's just this ever expanding thing. So this seems very internal, all these things, but the paper also talks about factors that can influence whether this feedback loop like even kicks off and continues to run. So these are what they call moderators of information-seeking behavior. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so there are a number of factors that influence this.
Yeah.
One set of factors is our own personality traits.
Yeah.
So, things like how much do we seek out novel experiences?
Right.
How much do we enjoy kind of like new and exciting things,
Hmm.
or, how organized and disciplined are we, right?
Right.
Another really significant factor is our belief in our own ability to learn and understand the information.
Yeah.
So, if you don't believe that you can grasp a concept, you're probably not going to try very hard to,
Right.
to understand it.
Yep.
You're less likely to even try in the first place.
Right.
Then there's the perceived cost.
Yeah.
How much effort or time do you anticipate it will take to learn something? And finally, the kind of the emotional aspect of the expected information plays a role.
Hmm.
So we tend to seek out information that we think is going to be, positive or interesting, and we tend to avoid things that we anticipate will be negative or upsetting.
Hmm.
As research by Hertwig and Engel suggests, and findings by Charpentier and colleagues support this.
That totally makes sense. I mean, you're much more likely to really dive into a topic if you think you can understand it and you think it's going to be, engaging or useful to you,
Right.
and much less likely to want to, even spend time on something that you're like, "Ooh, this seems too complex," or, "Ooh, I think this is going to be an unpleasant thing to learn about."
Right. And one of the really important points that the paper emphasizes here is that all of these factors, so our beliefs about our abilities,
Right.
the perceived effort, the expected emotional tone, these are all subjective.
Yeah.
And they can change based on our learning experiences.
Uh-huh.
So, as the work of Durek, and Tanaka and Murayama shows, if you have a positive experience learning something,
Right.
it might increase your confidence in your ability to learn, that kind of thing in the future.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So this process of weighing these different factors, the effort, the expected reward, the emotional tone, a lot of times this happens kind of automatically and
Yeah.
without us consciously thinking about it.
Right, right. It's like our brain's always doing these cost-benefit analyses just like
Yeah.
in the background all the time.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then the paper also talks about knowledge satiation,
Yeah.
right? So can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so knowledge satiation is basically that feeling of having a complete grasp of a topic.
Right.
You just feel like I understand this, I'm good.
I got.
And the kind of challenge here is that as research in metacognition,
Yeah.
it was basically our awareness of our own knowledge
Right.
has shown that this feeling of knowing can be inaccurate.
Okay.
So we might think that we understand something perfectly when we actually don't. And this false sense of mastery, as the work of Corneli and Bjork and Moriyama and colleagues has found,
Hmm.
can actually lead us to stop learning prematurely,
Hmm.
even though there may still be these gaps in our understanding.
I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? Like we've all had those experiences where we felt like, we understood a topic and then later realized, "Oh, I was so wrong."
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's particularly common with things like trivia.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Right.
here's the question, here's the answer, and then it's like, okay, great, I know the
We're
answer.
done. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily prompt these deeper questions. So I think we can sometimes trick ourselves into thinking that we know enough
Yeah.
when we really don't, and that can kind of interrupt that positive feedback loop of learning and exploration.
Right, right. It's like it can trick you into thinking you've reached the ceiling when there's really no ceiling.
Exactly.
Now, how do we even become aware of these knowledge gaps in the first place? Like,
Yeah.
how do we know what we don't know?
Right.
So the paper mentions extraneous factors that play a role in this. What exactly are those?
Yeah. So while kind of that expansion of our knowledge base is a really primary driver of becoming aware of new knowledge gaps, chance encounters and kind of the structure of our environment also play a really significant role. So you can think about, maybe stumbling upon an interesting article online,
Hmm.
or overhearing a conversation that's really captivating. These kinds of things, they can expose us to new information.
Yeah.
And they can make us aware of things that we didn't even know we didn't know.
Right. It's like the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the paper gives the example of, like a child that's growing up in a musical household.
Yeah.
They're just, by chance, they're going to be more likely to encounter information about music.
Right, right.
And so while it might seem kind of random, the environment that we inhabit really shapes the kinds of new information that we encounter and the potential knowledge gaps that that we might become aware of.
So it's a combination of our own learning journey, but also just the world around us
Yeah.
that kind of sparks this recognition of, oh, there's something I don't know.
Right.
So this framework seems to provide kind of a fresh perspective on curiosity and interest. How does it help us understand the various definitions and types of curiosity and interest that researchers have kind of been kicking around for all these years?
Yeah. So I think that's one of the really compelling aspects of this kind of process-oriented view, right?
Right.
So instead of trying to determine, which definition of curiosity or interest is the correct one,
Right.
the framework suggests that, all these different conceptualizations that researchers have come up with,
Right.
they can actually be viewed as different facets or different outcomes of the same fundamental knowledge acquisition process.
Gotcha.
So they're not really fundamentally different things. They're just kind of different ways of describing the same underlying drive.
Okay, so for instance, this distinction that researchers often make between situational interest and individual interest,
Yeah.
that's been a pretty significant area of study, especially in education.
Right, right. So Heedy and Renninger's four-phase model
Yeah,
describes, situational interest as being more reliant on external cues and support. So it's kind of like something in the environment is sparking your interest.
right.
Whereas individual interest is more self-sustaining,
Right.
It's like I'm interested in this because I find it interesting.
Right.
And so the reward learning framework interprets these two different types of interest as different stages in the development of the knowledge acquisition process. So in the beginning, maybe that feedback loop is less stable,
Okay.
and so it requires more external encouragement.
Hmm.
But then as we gain more knowledge and we kind of experience the rewards of learning,
Right.
the loop strengthens. It becomes more internally driven.
Gotcha.
And then that's what leads to individual interest. And so the framework really kind of provides a more detailed explanation of the reward processes that are underpinning these different phases.
Okay. Okay. So what about Berlin's distinction between specific and diversive curiosity?
Right.
One being focused on closing a particular gap in your knowledge,
Yeah.
and the other being more about just general exploration.
Yeah. So the framework kind of suggests that it's not really a strict division.
Yeah.
It's more of a continuum.
Correct.
So specific curiosity, that aligns really well with the idea that, you're seeking out information to close a defined knowledge gap.
Right.
But, even with diversive curiosity, even with seemingly random exploration,
Mm.
It's still guided by this desire to gain information and to experience that feeling of reward.
Mhm.
It's just that the knowledge gap is more general.
Right.
So think about, browsing through a library.
Right.
You might not have a specific book in mind, but you're still hoping to, discover something interesting
Yeah.
and to learn something new. And even the exploratory behavior of infants, which appears, very diversive. They're just kind of like touching everything and putting things in their mouths.
Yeah.
That can actually be understood through reward learning models,
Right.
where the infant is constantly seeking out stimuli that offer a good balance of novelty and learnability,
Right. Right.
driven by that anticipated reward of new information,
Yeah.
as Udair and colleagues have shown.
So even when we're just kind of like poking around
Yeah.
and just kind of like seeing what's out there, there's still that learning reward mechanism.
Exactly.
Okay, and then what about like the different dimensions or domains of curiosity? So like epistemic curiosity, perceptual curiosity, social curiosity,
Right.
things like that.
So the framework proposes that the fundamental process of knowledge acquisition and reward is really the same, regardless of the type of stimulus.
Right.
So whether you're, curious about a scientific concept, or you're curious about, a visual puzzle, or you're curious about social interactions, it's still that same underlying mechanism of
Right.
recognizing a gap, seeking out information, and then feeling rewarded by
Yeah.
gaining that knowledge.
Right.
And what about domain specificity?
Yeah.
So the fact that some people are just, more curious about certain subjects than others.
Right.
The framework's idea is that likely arises from the kind of the self-reinforcing nature of the reward loop within those specific areas of knowledge over time.
Okay.
So, if you have a rewarding experience, learning about astronomy,
Yeah.
then you're more likely to seek out more astronomy information in the future,
Right.
which is then going to further strengthen, your interest in in that field.
So the more positive learning experiences you have in a certain area, the more that fuels further interest in that area.
Exactly.
Makes sense. And then finally, like, what about those personality traits like sensation seeking or openness to experience or need for cognition? How do those fit into this framework?
Yeah, so the paper suggests that these traits can be viewed as reflecting the kind of generalized reward value
Oh, yeah.
of knowledge or information seeking. So someone who's high in novelty seeking,
Hmm.
they might just have this kind of a generally higher expectation of reward associated with acquiring new information.
Right.
Someone high in need for cognition might have a higher baseline reward value for just like engaging in information processing activities.
Right.
And these kind of generalized reward values, they likely develop through repeated cycles of knowledge acquisition and the associated rewards. And that leads to these more stable kind of trait-like tendencies,
Mhm.
which aligns really well with, social cognitive views of personality.
Right, right.
So our accumulated learning experiences can actually kind of shape these broader personality characteristics related
Yeah.
to curiosity.
So like all those rewarding learning experiences you've had in the past have built up into this more stable personality trait.
Exactly.
Okay. Now the paper also touches on this idea of curiosity as an aversive state. So this kind of uncomfortable feeling of uncertainty that we're kind of driven to resolve. So how does the reward learning framework view that aspect of it?
Yeah, so the idea that curiosity kind of involves this unpleasant feeling of uncertainty,
Yeah.
and we're motivated to kind of alleviate that, that's been around for quite some time. But the reward learning perspective offers kind of a different angle on this.
Okay.
So it draws on this idea of the incentive salience model. And what the incentive salience model does is it distinguishes between liking, so that's the pleasurable feeling
Right.
of
That you're
reward.
sprit speaker.